Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Madison Carter had always believed in balance, empathy, and the quiet steadiness that makes a home thrive. As a senior midwife with nearly a decade of experience, she had built her life around nurturing fragile beginnings and comforting frightened mothers during their most vulnerable moments. But in her own home, that comforting presence was slowly becoming irrelevant. The laughter she once shared with her husband, Brandon Hayes, had long evaporated into a cold, heavy fog of emotional distance. Brandon, who used to surprise her with late-night milkshakes and weekend road trips, now buried himself in endless work emergencies, shutting himself in his study or slipping out during odd hours. Their dinners grew shorter, their conversations thinner, and Madison could feel the foundation of her marriage groaning beneath the weight of unspoken truths. She often found herself replaying old memories, his warm smile, his playful teasing, trying to understand where the fracture began. But Madison was not naive. She was observant, emotionally intelligent, and deeply intuitive. Over the months, she sensed micro changes that others might miss. The subtle smell of new cologne he never wore at home, the sudden obsession with his phone, the calls he stepped outside to answer, the renewed motivation to dress better, and the shimmering sense of guilt shadowing his eyes whenever she looked too closely. Yet she said nothing. Instead, she quietly retreated into herself, pouring extra hours into maternity ward, where her calm presence was still valued, still needed, still respected. Every time Brandon returned home late with flimsy excuses, Madison felt another invisible string between them snap. But rather than panic or confront him, she observed, waited, and gathered strength. If her husband thought she was oblivious, he severely underestimated the very woman who held lives in her hands daily. Brandon Hayes had always been a man driven by impulse, ambitious, restless, and easily swayed by whatever fed his ego. When he met Chloe Winters, a lively, rebellious colleague with striking blue eyes and a recklessly spontaneous spirit, he mistook his renewed excitement for love. Chloe was everything Madison was not. Unpredictable instead of composed, dramatic instead of calm, fiery instead of steady. Chloe's existence fed his hunger to feel young again, to feel desired, to feel important. Brandon began creating two separate worlds, one where he was a respectable husband, and the other where he was a thrilling lover living a double life peppered with secret dates, late-night rendezvous, and wild promises he had no intention of keeping. Chloe, dazzled by his attention and convinced she was a soulmate, felt deeply into the illusion he created. But Chloe was not a woman who thought ahead. She acted and desired without caution. She believed Brandon when he claimed his marriage was basically dead. She believed him when he said Madison was emotionally distant and no longer needed him. She did not see the lies, the manipulation, or the contradictions. Instead, she saw herself as a heroine in a forbidden romance. Their affair burned quickly, too quickly, and Brandon, intoxicated by the thrill, never noticed the emotional quicksand forming beneath his feet. Meanwhile, Chloe's attachment deepened, her dependency intensified, and her expectations grew dangerously large. She wanted more time, more commitment, more promises, and Brandon, eager to maintain the fantasy, gave her every lie she needed to hear. He had no idea that this reckless entanglement would soon unfold in ways he never imagined. Madison never hired a private investigator. She didn't need to. Her instincts were sharp, and her patience was stronger than Brandon ever realized. One evening, after noticing he dressed too well for a supposed late shift, Madison followed him in her car, keeping her distance as he drove across town. She watched him pull into the parking lot of a quiet Italian bistro and step out, straightening his shirt, checking his hair, rehearsing a smile she hadn't seen in months. Then Chloe Winters appeared, practically running into his arms. Madison felt something inside her chest tighten, but she did not break down. She simply observed as Brandon kissed Chloe with the same tenderness he once reserved for her. Madison did not cry. She did not panic. She did not storm inside. Instead, she sat silently in her car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, vowing quietly to herself that she would not collapse into the helpless figure he assumed she would become. The next morning, she behaved as though nothing had happened, packing Brandon's lunch, asking about his schedule, and offering him her usual soft smile. She greeted the nurses at the maternity ward the same way she always did, gently adjusting newborns and comforting their mothers. But deep within, a transformation had begun. She realized that confronting Brandon immediately would only give him the power to script the narrative. Excuses, lies, or apologies meant to string her along. No, she deserved control, clarity, and justice. The woman who helped bring children into the world daily was far stronger than Brandon ever acknowledged. She would not crumble under betrayal. She would rise from it, and she would choose the battlefield, one Brandon would never see coming. A week later, Madison overheard something that shifted her emotional compass entirely. Brandon had stepped outside for what he claimed was a work-related call, but in his haste, he left the sliding door partially open. Madison, walking past, froze when she heard Chloe's frantic voice through the speaker, her tone trembling with anxiety. "Brandon, I'm late. 5 weeks late. I think I'm pregnant." Madison felt the air leave her lungs, not from shock, but from the sheer audacity of fate. She listened as Brandon panicked, promising Chloe he would handle everything, and vowing he would protect her no matter what. Madison walked away from the door silently, her expression unreadable, her pulse frighteningly calm. She now understood the depth of Brandon's deception and the scale of the lie he had built. This was no longer an affair. This was a deliberate betrayal of a family she had spent years nurturing. Yet, instead of spiraling into devastation, Madison felt an unexpected surge of clarity. She sat at the edge of the bed, folded her hands, and allowed her mind to process the truth in full. Brandon's actions had nothing to do with her worth. They reflected his weakness, his selfishness, and the emotional void he'd been trying to bury with reckless choices. And Chloe, poor, naive Chloe, was about to walk into a storm she did not even know existed. Madison realized she held a unique advantage. Timing. She would not confront them, not yet. She would prepare herself, study the situation, and wait patiently. She would reclaim her dignity in a way that neither Brandon nor Chloe ever saw coming. Madison was not a woman who retaliated impulsively. She believed in deliberate, meaningful consequences. After the revelation of Chloe's pregnancy, she began orchestrating a quiet but masterful plan. The first step was securing a transfer from her current hospital to the one Chloe was registered at, Riverstone Medical Center, the city's busiest maternity facility. Madison used her reputation and years of high-level expertise to secure the move within a week. She told Brandon it was an opportunity for professional growth, and he agreed without a second thought, too consumed by his secret life to question her motives. Meanwhile, Madison accessed the hospital's maternity registration system and located Chloe's file. She noted the expected delivery window, the complications listed in Chloe's medical history, and the details of her prenatal visits. As the weeks progressed, Madison behaved like the perfect, supportive wife. She cooked, cleaned, asked about Brandon's day, and even initiated soft conversations, giving him no reason to suspect her growing power. She watched him squirm under the weight of his lies, noticing how he became jumpy when his phone buzzed or when she walked into a room unexpectedly. Madison said nothing. Her silence became a fortress around her. She maintained absolute professionalism at the hospital, handling other patients with care while quietly preparing for the moment Chloe would call Brandon in panic. She knew that when the time came, Brandon would rush Chloe to Riverstone Medical Center, and she would be waiting, not as a jealous wife, not as a heartbroken victim, but as the senior midwife in charge. Brandon's double life began unraveling faster than he expected. Chloe's pregnancy demanded attention, emotional reassurance, and constant presence, all of which clashed with the facade he maintained at home. Madison noticed his sudden bouts of irritability, his increasingly sloppy lies, and the guilt-drenched excuses he offered whenever he returned home late. She could sense that the pressure was crushing him, but she offered no reaction. Her stillness unnerved him more than anger ever could. She laughed at his jokes, wished him good night, packed his lunches, every gesture designed to let him believe she was still blissfully unaware. The more she acted normal, the more paranoid Brandon became, his mind spiraling into anxious loops. Chloe, on the other hand, became increasingly demanding. Her pregnancy heightened her emotions, and she clung to Brandon like a lifeline. She wanted reassurance of his commitment. She wanted to know when he would free himself. And she wanted promises that he would be the father she envisioned. Brandon lied to her as easily as he lied to Madison, weaving stories to keep her calm. But Chloe was young, emotional, and impulsive. She unconsciously started dropping hints at work, speaking cryptically around colleagues, and expressing jealousy in ways that risked exposing everything. Brandon found himself juggling emotional fires in both worlds, never realizing that Madison had already mapped out his downfall down to the minute. The silence she kept wasn't ignorance. It was precision. The day Madison officially transferred to Riverstone Medical Center, she felt a renewed sense of control. The hospital was huge, bustling with mothers-to-be, anxious families, and the echo of newborn cries. This environment energized her rather than overwhelmed her. She introduced herself to staff, handled cases with elegance and expertise, and quickly gained the respect of doctors and nurses. Madison knew how to blend in professionally while keeping her personal strategy neatly tucked away. She didn't ask about Chloe's appointments or pry into her medical record beyond what she had already seen. Everything had already been set in motion. She only needed to wait for the natural progression of events. At home, Brandon noticed she seemed happier. He asked her casually as she was adjusting well, and she smiled, thanking him for his support. Her calmness made him deeply uncomfortable. He feared that any wrong word could expose him, yet he had no idea she had already transferred to Chloe's hospital. Madison continued her routine, kissing him goodbye each morning, sending him good luck messages on tough days, even making him his favorite meals. Her precision in maintaining normalcy was almost surgical. Meanwhile, Chloe continued her prenatal care, completely unaware that her lover's wife now served as a senior staff member in the same building. Fate was aligning perfectly, and Madison simply waited for the inevitable call that would drag Brandon into the biggest shock of his life. On a rainy Thursday evening, it finally happened. Chloe went into premature labor. The contractions hit her violently and unexpectedly, sending her into a frenzy of fear and pain. She clutched her stomach and screamed for Brandon, who panicked and practically dragged her into his car. He sped recklessly through the city, rain pounding against the windshield, Chloe crying and gasping between contractions. "It's too early, Brandon." "Oh, God, something's wrong," she sobbed. Brandon tried to comfort her, but his own hands were trembling too hard to even dial the hospital properly. He drove straight to Riverstone Medical Center, unaware that he was racing directly into the center of Madison's perfectly laid plan. Inside the hospital, nurses rushed to prepare a delivery room. Brandon held Chloe tightly, whispering reassurances he barely believed. He had no idea which midwife would be on shift, and the thought didn't even cross his mind. His entire focus was on Chloe's pain and the fear that his double life was about to implode. Chloe cried louder as her contractions intensified, her nails digging into Brandon's arm. When the nurse informed him that the senior midwife would arrive momentarily, Brandon nodded anxiously, pacing in frantic circles. He had no idea that the footsteps approaching the door belonged to the woman he betrayed. The door opened quietly, and Madison stepped in wearing her professional uniform, her expression composed and unreadable. Brandon froze. His knees nearly buckled as his breath caught in his throat. For a moment, his world went silent. Chloe didn't even look up at first, too overwhelmed by pain. But Brandon could not look away. His wife stood before him, the very person who nurtured life, who comforted strangers, who had shared his home, his bed, his dreams. And she was now the midwife delivering the child he conceived with another woman. The universe had placed him exactly where he feared most, with no lies left to hide behind. Madison greeted them with calm professionalism. "Chloe Winters?" she said evenly, checking the chart. Chloe nodded between contractions, unaware of the emotional storm brewing beside her. Madison's voice remained soft, steady, and deeply controlled. "I'll be assisting you through the delivery. We'll take it one step at a time." She didn't look at Brandon once, which made him even more terrified. Every second felt like punishment. The walls seemed to close in. He couldn't speak. Every word felt like poison on his tongue. Madison began guiding Chloe through the breathing, adjusting equipment, and preparing her body for delivery. She was flawless, composed, terrifyingly serene. The reckoning had begun. Chloe's labor escalated rapidly. Madison remained by her side, giving gentle instructions, adjusting her posture, and ensuring her comfort. Every movement Madison made was deliberate, compassionate, and deeply professional. She never once allowed her personal emotions to interfere, not even when Chloe cried out Brandon's name in desperation. Watching his wife help his mistress deliver his child shattered Brandon's remaining pride. He stood in the corner, trembling, drenched in guilt and disbelief. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to collapse at Madison's feet, but he knew this room was not his space. Madison's authority filled the air, and he felt smaller than he ever had in his life. After an intense final push, Chloe delivered a healthy baby boy. Chloe sobbed with relief, reaching for the child as Madison wrapped him carefully. The room softened for a moment, filled with the fragile beauty of new life. Madison handed the baby to Chloe with gentle precision, whispering congratulations. But even as she smiled at Chloe, her eyes remained coldly unreadable toward Brandon. When the nurses stepped in to assist with post-care, Madison finally turned to Brandon. "I need a word with you," she said quietly. Her tone bore no anger, just a chilling calmness that shook Brandon to his core. He followed her out of the room, terrified of what awaited him next. In the quiet hallway outside the delivery room, Brandon felt like his entire world was about to collapse beneath his feet. The lights overhead hummed steadily, contrasting with the sheer panic roaring in his chest. Madison stood with her back straight, her posture calm but unyielding. She didn't raise her voice or show any sign of emotional outburst. Instead, she held an envelope, white, crisp sealed, between her fingers as if it were nothing more than routine paperwork. But Brandon recognized the weight behind it before she even spoke. "Brandon," she said softly, her tone steady like a surgeon's hand, "I'm giving you this because today marks the end of our marriage." Brandon felt an electric jolt shoot through him, his throat tightening until he could barely breathe. He took a step toward her, desperately trying to summon words. Excuses, apologies, anything, but none came. His voice drowned under the crushing truth that she had orchestrated this moment long, before he even realized what was happening. Madison didn't look angry. She looked resolved, like a woman who had already cried her tears in private and had now risen above them. "I knew about Chloe months ago," she continued, "and I knew about the pregnancy. I waited, not because I needed proof, but because I needed clarity. And today, Brandon, you've given me everything I needed." Her calm voice cut deeper than any fury could have. She extended the envelope toward him. His shaking hands took it reluctantly, and he immediately felt the unmistakable thickness of legal documents inside. "These are finalized divorce papers," she said. "All you need to do is sign. I won't fight you. I won't beg. I won't stay." Brandon's vision blurred as shame, guilt, and disbelief spun wildly inside him. When he finally found the courage to look up at her, Madison was already turning away, walking back toward the maternity ward with the same grace she had always carried, leaving him limp and shattered in the hallway. Meanwhile, inside the delivery room, Chloe remained blissfully unaware of the emotional earthquake that had just cracked open the hallway. She lay exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, cradling her newborn son against her chest with trembling arms. Her mind floated somewhere between joy and fear, but mostly she felt relief that Brandon had been by her side, relief that the baby was healthy, relief that her life was about to change for the better. When Brandon walked back into the room, however, Chloe immediately sensed that something was deeply wrong. His face was pale, his hands shaking, his eyes bloodshot with shock. "Brandon," she whispered anxiously, "what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." She didn't know how right she was. Brandon couldn't speak for several seconds. His throat felt like it was filled with stones. Finally, with a trembling exhale, he sat beside her on the bed. Chloe tried to reach for his hand, but he pulled away instinctively, something he'd never done before. "Chloe," he said, voice cracking, "the midwife. That was my wife." Chloe blinked in confusion, her brain failing to process the meaning of the words. "What? No. Brandon, that can't be." But then she remembered the midwife's familiar eyes, her composed voice, the strange tension she sensed but dismissed. Slowly, horrifyingly, the truth sank in. She gasped sharply, clutching her son tighter. "You brought me here." "To your wife," she choked. "You let her deliver my baby?" Her voice rose with betrayal and heartbreak. Brandon tried to reach for her, but Chloe recoiled as if burned. The fantasy she lived in shattered instantly, leaving her feeling humiliated, played, and exposed. The man she thought loved her had thrown her into the most humiliating scenario imaginable, and she realized, with dawning terror, that she might never forgive him. Brandon spent the next few days oscillating between denial and dread. He tried calling Madison repeatedly, but she never answered. She had moved out of the house the very next morning, quietly, efficiently, without taking anything except her clothes and personal belongings. She even left her wedding ring neatly placed on the kitchen table, an act that felt not like anger, but closure. Brandon walked through the empty rooms, haunted by memories of laughter and love that now felt like distant echoes. He realized too late that the woman he had taken for granted was far stronger than he ever gave her credit for. But the consequences were only beginning. Chloe refused to let him visit freely. She felt violated, tricked, and betrayed, not just by the affair, but by the humiliation he dragged her into. Even though she still loved him, she could not trust him with her emotions or her newborn child. Brandon's life spiraled rapidly. His performance at work faltered, his relationships fractured, and his mind spiraled with anxiety and regret. He blamed Madison at first, but deep inside he knew he had orchestrated his own downfall. His dreams of building a new life with Chloe evaporated as Chloe became increasingly distant, overwhelmed by single motherhood and her own shame. She began realizing that Brandon's promises were built on lies, and if he lied to his wife so easily, he could just as easily lie to her. Brandon, now living alone in a cramped apartment, found himself replaying the night at the hospital over and over in his head. The cold calmness in Madison's eyes, the envelope in his hand, and the crushing realization that he had lost the only woman who ever genuinely loved him. Chloe had expected motherhood to be beautiful, exhausting, and transformative, but she hadn't expected to go through it while drowning in emotional turmoil. Every time she looked at her baby boy, she saw fragments of Brandon's face, and every time she remembered him, she felt a mix of longing and fury. She struggled through sleepless nights, doctor appointments, breastfeeding challenges, and endless household chores, all while trying to pretend she hadn't been deeply humiliated. Her parents visited one afternoon and immediately sensed her distress. They pressured her for the truth until she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as she recounted everything. Brandon's lies, his promises, the horrifying moment she realized his wife had delivered her baby. Her mother held her, whispering that she deserved so much better, while her father's anger rose like fire, vowing to protect his daughter and grandson from further chaos. Chloe finally confronted Brandon during one of his visits. "I loved you," she said, voice shaking, "but you made me feel like a fool. I trusted you in my life. I believed you when you said your wife didn't care about you, but she cared enough to walk away with dignity. And her voice broke as tears streamed down her face. I walked straight into humiliation because of you." Brandon tried to defend himself, but every word only made things worse. Chloe finally told him she needed space, time, and distance. "If you want to be in your son's life, you can," she said, "but you will not be in mine." It was a decision she made through heartbreak, but it was the only one that protected her sanity. Brandon left her apartment feeling more unwanted and powerless than he ever had in his life. While Brandon and Chloe struggled through the fallout, Madison blossomed quietly and gracefully. She rented a small but beautiful apartment near the river, bright, peaceful, and filled with soft colors and warm light. She bought new furniture, new sheets, new curtains, everything that symbolized her fresh start. Every morning, she drank tea by her window and reminded herself that she had survived something meant to break her. She thrived at Riverstone Medical Center, where she became known as a calm senior midwife with unmatched excellence. Her patients adored her, her colleagues respected her, and her reputation grew. She even began mentoring new nurses, guiding them with patience and wisdom. Madison's internal healing was slow, but steady. She attended therapy, reconnected with old friends, and allowed herself the joy of simple pleasures, long walks, photography, gardening, and cooking meals for one without sadness. She didn't rush into dating or seek validation from anyone. She embraced solitude as a sanctuary rather than a punishment. Her dignity, her strength, and her determination became the foundation of her new life. And though Brandon occasionally attempted to reach out, Madison ignored every call. She no longer needed answers from him. She no longer needed closure. She had created her own. As Madison rose higher, Brandon fell deeper. His performance at work deteriorated so heavily that HR scheduled repeated warnings. He could barely focus, barely sleep, barely function. His apartment stayed messy. His meals consisted of takeout boxes, and his reflections became painful reminders of the man he used to be. He tried reaching out to Chloe to salvage something meaningful from the ruins, but she grew colder with every conversation. She insisted that their connection was built on lies, and that she needed to protect her mental health. Brandon found himself driving past Madison's old house, hoping for a sign of her presence, forgetting that she had already begun her new life far away from him. In quieter moments, the gravity of his choices crushed him. He remembered the night he proposed to Madison, how she cried with joy, how she believed in forever. He remembered their wedding vows, their laughter, their dreams of having children one day. He remembered everything he shattered for nothing more than temporary thrill. His regret became a venom that ate away at his confidence, leaving him hollow and ashamed. He realized too late that Madison had always been his anchor, and without her, he drifted aimlessly. His punishment was not Madison's revenge. It was the emptiness he now lived with daily. Chloe's independence began as necessity, but grew into strength. She learned to care for her son with fierce determination, setting routines, attending support groups, and accepting help from her family. She slowly reclaimed her identity outside of being Brandon's mistress. She found a part-time job working remotely, allowing her to stay home while still earning a modest income. Every day, she grew stronger, wiser, and less emotionally tied to the wreckage of her past. She watched her son grow, admired his tiny fingers and bright eyes, and promised herself that he would grow up in a stable, loving environment, whether or not Brandon was part of it. Over time, Chloe's resentment toward Brandon transformed into clarity. She realized that their relationship had been built on illusions. She had confused excitement for love and promises for truth. Her healing didn't come from punishing Brandon, but from forgiving herself for falling into a trap she didn't see coming. She moved forward with newfound maturity, refusing to let her past define her future. And although she allowed Brandon minimal visitation rights, she ensured boundaries were firm. Her life was no longer tied to his choices, and for the first time in a long time, Chloe felt free. Madison's journey eventually led her to a new chapter she never anticipated: friendship. She met Daniel Foster, a pediatric doctor at the hospital, during a medical workshop. He admired her composure, respected her skill, and appreciated her kindness. Their friendship formed naturally, without pressure or romantic expectations. They shared lunches, collaborated on cases, and gradually opened up about their lives. Daniel was gentle, deeply understanding, and had a quiet humor that brought a lightness to Madison's days. She never once felt rushed or pushed, only seen, valued, and respected. As weeks turned into months, Daniel became a comforting presence in her life. He never asked about her marriage unless she brought it up. Instead, he focused on who she was now, not who she had been with Brandon. Madison found herself smiling more, laughing more, and feeling a warmth she thought she had lost forever. She wasn't in love, not yet, but she was healing, growing, and rediscovering emotions she had buried long ago. And whether or not romance blossomed, Madison finally felt that her heart was safe again, protected by her strength and surrounded by people who appreciated her worth. One chilly afternoon, Brandon approached Madison outside the hospital. He looked thinner, older, drained from months of emotional collapse. "Madison, please," he whispered desperately. "Just talk to me. One conversation. I'm begging you." She paused, her calm gaze settling on him without bitterness. "Brandon," she said softly, "there's nothing left to say." He tried insisting, pleading, explaining how sorry he was, how lost he felt, how he wished he could undo everything. But Madison remained unmoved. She had healed far too much to reopen old wounds. "You didn't just betray me," she said gently. "You betrayed yourself. And long before you brought Chloe into this, you left our marriage in your heart." Brandon's eyes welled with tears. "I miss you," he whispered. "I miss us." Madison inhaled deeply, her voice steady. "You miss who I was to you, not who I am now. And I won't go back." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She merely honored her truth. Brandon realized then that his final chance had slipped away. Madison stepped back, smiled softly, a smile of peace, not affection, and walked away. She didn't look back. Brandon stood frozen, watching her silhouette fade into the hospital entrance, knowing he would live with the weight of this moment for the rest of his life. Madison Carter began the final phase of her healing the same way she survived the first. Quietly, gracefully, and with strength, she embraced her new independence fully, continuing her work as a senior midwife while nurturing her growing bond with Daniel. She allowed herself to dream again, but this time with boundaries, self-respect, and a foundation built on honesty. She visited new countries, took photography classes, and slowly pieced together the version of herself she had always wanted to be, a woman defined not by her marriage, but by her resilience and her purpose. Meanwhile, Brandon watched from a distance as both women he had hurt flourished without him. Chloe raised her son with pride and stability, eventually co-parenting with boundaries that kept her heart safe. Madison found joy, confidence, and perhaps the gentle beginning of a new love. In the end, the greatest justice was not revenge, it was freedom. Madison closed the final chapter of her marriage with a peaceful heart, stepping forward into a life richer and brighter than anything she had ever imagined. She was no longer the woman betrayed. She was the woman reborn. That's the end of the story. What did you learn about the story? Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.